So this upcoming weekend was planned to be a very interesting weekend in the world of the UFC, particularly in the middleweight division, as we were, in theory, supposed to come out of it with a new next-in-line number one contender. I mean, not an actual number one contender just yet, because as it stands right now, the number one contender is Israel Adesanya, who in a couple of months' time is going to face off against Dricus Duplessis for the middleweight championship of the world. And so we already knew who the number one contender was, but after this upcoming weekend, we were supposed to know who the next title challenger was going to be, as the general consensus in the fight community was that the winner in the main event of the UFC Saudi Arabia card between Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev was supposed to be the next title challenger. And so now, with Khamzat having to drop out of the fight due to an injury, we don't really have that on the table. We do still have a Robert Whittaker fight. He's going to fight Aliskerov. But the rankings between the two fighters, they're too disparate. Aliskerov is not nearly established enough to really have put himself into a situation where he could be fighting to be the number one contender, or rather the the next in line to be the number one contender. But that should still shape up to be a pretty interesting fight. I mean, perhaps not as interesting as Whittaker and Khamzat in terms of the future of the division, but interesting enough in its own. Robert Whittaker seems to think that Aliskerov is actually going to give him a more difficult fight than what Khamzat would have given him. And who knows, maybe there's something to that. But what this really underscores is that at this particular juncture of time, we don't really have a clear picture what the future of the middleweight division looks like. Because not only now do we have our means of determining the next challenger pretty much taken off of the table, there are other fighters that are actually sitting around now saying that they're not going to take another fight until they get a title fight. So, of course, now I'm talking about the former middleweight champion of the world, Sean Strickland, the guy who lost the middleweight championship of the world to Dricus Duplessis in what some people, including Dana White, seem to have considered to be fairly controversial circumstances. There are a lot of people out there who seem to think that Sean Strickland actually won that fight. But of course, that's not how it came out on the judges' scorecards. It came out the way that it is, and now Dricus Duplessis is walking around as the middleweight champion of the world. Now Israel Adesanya has returned to competition. And there was absolutely no way after the title run that he went on. That string of defenses that he had were absolutely epic. No matter how it ended, there was absolutely no way that a champion like Adesanya was not going to come back in his first fight after losing the middleweight championship of the world and not get a fight for that championship. There was no way that that was not going to happen. And Sean Strickland, even if you are one of the people who believe that he won that fight against Dricus Duplessis, to be honest with you, I didn't actually get a chance to see that one myself, so I couldn't speak for myself. But if you are one of those people, he didn't successfully defend that championship even once. Whether or not you think that title defense should have been successful or not, he didn't. Nor has his work since losing the championship even really suggested that he should be the guy that's in line to be the next challenger. His last fight was who? Paulo Costa? A guy who, in very short order, people are just going to start saying, who? Oh, Paulo Costa, who? Oh, Paulo Costa, who? Let's face it, after Paulo Costa's antics in the UFC over the past couple of years, the fact that correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that Paulo Costa has actually won a fight since he lost his championship fight to Israel Adesanya. So, personally, I like Sean Strickland, but the simple fact of the matter is that, since losing his championship, he hasn't really beaten anybody that matters. I mean, Paulo Costa, he went on a really epic run up until the point when he lost to Adesanya. But at this particular juncture, it doesn't matter. They keep putting on pay-per-view, which is kind of wild to me, but I mean, there's probably not a more irrelevant fighter appearing on UFC pay-per-views than Paulo Costa. And that's one of Sean's resume items since losing the championship, that he never defended successfully once in the first place. So I have a hard time imagining that he should be the next guy to challenge for the championship after Adesanya has his opportunity, to win or lose. And that's going to be a very interesting fight. Israel Adesanya is making that one extremely spicy. I mean, and he kind of was right from the moment that Dricus Duplessis originally had first emerged as the number one contender. When he fought in the, when he beat Robert Whittaker, and honestly, I don't think that anybody expected him to beat Robert Whittaker, let alone for him to beat Robert Whittaker in the way that he beat Robert Whittaker. But to jump in the cage with him and start screaming a bunch of racial epithets and shit like that, that was pretty wild. And then to turn around and just basically play like, oh, well, I'm not going to fight DDP. Like, just not going to do it. Which basically, whatever excuse it was that Adesanya had, that was basically what it boiled down to. It was just like, oh, I'm not going to fight him. I just jumped out here and spat all this weird racial crap at him, and now I'm not going to fight him. Until there's a championship, until he's no longer the champion. Till now, he needs to go through DDP to potentially become the champion again. Oh, okay. Now he's going to fight him. Huh, okay. In all honesty, I'm kind of surprised that Dricus even agreed to that. Yeah, I know that he does want to get his hands on Israel Adesanya for whatever reason that he wants to get his hands on him. But I kind of feel like after something like that, if I were Dricus, I probably would have said, yeah, you know what, Adesanya needs to go and take some fights. He needs to go and win a couple of fights before he can before I'll agree to face him for the championship. But for whatever you want to say to it, I mean, Dricus wants to do it now, so he's going to do it now. But then think about where this leaves Sean Strickland in terms of waiting out for a championship fight. I mean, so maybe Adesanya beats Duplessis, becomes the middleweight champion of the world for a third time. Well, there's a pretty good motivation for him to want to fight Sean Strickland. I mean, Strickland took the championship off of him the second time that he lost it. Needs to go out and get that win back. He needs to go out and he needs to get that win back just so that they can have a trilogy fight, so that he can prove that he is actually better than Sean Strickland, if he actually is better than Sean Strickland. And I got to be honest with you. I mean, nobody expected Sean Strickland to ever be in the conversation to beat Israel Adesanya, let alone to go out for 5 rounds and execute one of the most perfect fight plans in the history of mixed martial arts and actually take the middleweight championship of the world off of him. I mean, previously that had only been done by one guy. And then Adesanya went and he won it back in his return match. At that point, the aura of the unstoppable Israel Adesanya was still pretty much, it was scarcely disturbed, if at all. And now, should Adesanya manage to reclaim the championship against Dricus Duplessis, he does need to go out there and he does need to get that back. And then on the other hand, should he lose to Dricus Duplessis, that aura will pretty much be gone. So there are a lot of fighters in the middleweight division of the UFC right now that are playing some pretty high stakes games. I mean, except for Paulo Costa. God only knows what the hell that guy thinks he's doing right now.